January 1945, somewhere over Germany at 22,000 feet. A B-17 Flying Fortress shudders as flak tears through its fuselage. In the Navigator's compartment, Lieutenant David Chen slumps over his charts. Dead. The pilot, Captain James Reilly, stares at the destroyed navigation instruments. No radio compass, no G navigation system, no navigator. 400 miles to England, 8 hours of darkness ahead. Most pilots would call for help and pray someone finds them. Reilly reaches for the dead navigator's star charts instead. What he does next will prove that sometimes the oldest navigation method is the only one that matters. The mission briefing had been routine. 30 B-17s from the 94th Bomb Group targeting synthetic oil refineries outside Leipzig. A night mission, which meant worse weather, harder navigation, and German night fighters that had gotten terrifyingly good at finding bombers in the dark. But oil was the lifeblood of the Reich. Every refinery destroyed was another month. The war might end sooner. Captain James Reilly had sat in the second row of the briefing hut, studying the target maps with the same intensity he brought to everything. 27 years old, third-generation Boston Irish, with a face that looked older than his years and eyes that never stopped calculating. Before the war, he'd worked merchant ships running between Boston and Liverpool. He'd learned to navigate by stars when the ship's radio direction finder failed during a storm in 1939. The old captain had taught him sextant, chronometer, nautical almanac, and mathematics, ancient technology, reliable. When Reilly had enlisted in the Army Air Forces in 1942, his merchant marine experience fast-tracked him to pilot training. He was good, not naturally gifted like some pilots who flew by feel, but methodical, precise. He understood that flying was mathematics dressed up as adventure, weight and balance, fuel consumption, airspeed versus ground speed. Navigation was just more mathematics, vectors and angles, time and distance. His crew trusted him. 10 men whose lives depended on his calculations every time they crossed the North Sea into enemy territory. They'd flown 23 missions together. Not the most in the group, but enough to know each other's rhythms, enough to function as one organism when things went wrong. The navigator was Lieutenant David Chen, 24, Berkeley graduate, mathematics major, the smartest man Reilly had ever flown with. Chen could calculate wind drift in his head, could dead reckon their position within a mile after hours of flight, could find them in the worst weather when other navigators got lost and doomed their crews. Chen and Reilly had a rapport. Both understood navigation as problem solving. Both appreciated precision. Chen would call up course corrections over the intercom with decimal point accuracy. Reilly would adjust heading with equal precision. It was a partnership built on mathematics and mutual respect. On this night, January 14, 1945, they would need every bit of that precision. Takeoff was at 1900 hours, full darkness. The B-17, nicknamed Maiden Boston after Reilly's hometown, lifted off from Rugham Airfield with a full bomb load and maximum fuel. 10 men aboard. 4 officers, 6 enlisted. Each man had written letters before the mission, not superstition, just prudence. The formation climbed through cloud cover and turned east. Reilly held his position in the bomber stream, flying on instruments through the overcast. The North Sea passed beneath them, invisible in the darkness. Radio silence, navigation lights extinguished, just 30 bombers cutting through winter night toward Germany. They crossed the coast at 2130 hours. German radar had certainly seen them by now. Flak batteries would be alerted. Night fighters would be scrambling. The formation tightened up. Defensive boxes, overlapping fields of fire from the 50 caliber machine guns. Chen's voice came over. The intercom, calm, professional. Pilot navigator on course. ETA to IP 22 minutes. Wind from northwest 15 knots. Initial point. The IP was where the bomb run would begin, where they'd fly straight and level while the bombardier lined up his sights, where they'd be most vulnerable. Reilly acknowledged. Roger, Nav. 22 minutes. The aircraft droned eastward. Inside, each crew member focused on his job. The bombardier preparing his Norden bomb sight, the radio operator monitoring frequencies, the gunners scanning darkness for the shape of German fighters, the flight engineer watching engine temperatures and fuel flow. Reilly flew, hands steady on the yoke, eyes scanning instruments. Airspeed 160 knots, altitude 22,000 feet, oil pressure good, manifold pressure good, everything nominal. Then the flak started. It always started the same way, black bursts blooming in the darkness ahead. German 88mm guns firing predicted barrages. They didn't need to see you to hit you, they just needed to fill the sky with shrapnel and wait for bombers to fly through it. The formation scattered slightly, each pilot making small adjustments, not breaking formation, just giving the flak gunners a harder problem. Moving targets. Reilly held course. The bomber shook as flak burst close, metal fragments pinging off the fuselage. Close, too close. Then they were through the first barrage. Reilly exhaled, checked his crew. All positions, pilot. Report status. One by one, the crew checked in. All good. No injuries. Minor damage to the tail section, but nothing critical. Chen's voice came up. Pilot, nav, approaching IP, 3 minutes. Come left to heading 090. Reilly adjusted. Roger, left to 090. The formation began its bomb run, straight and level. The worst part of every mission, speed constant, altitude constant, course constant, a perfect target. The flak intensified. The Germans knew where the IP was. They always knew. They'd calculated the approach vectors and set up killing zones. Black bursts filled the sky. The bomber rocked and shuddered. Something hit the number 3 engine. Temperature spiked. Reilly feathered the prop and shut it down. 3 engines now, still flyable. The bombardier called out, "Bomb bay doors open, 30 seconds to release." More flak, closer, one burst directly ahead. The aircraft flew through the expanding cloud of shrapnel. That's when it happened. The hit came from below, a shell that burst beneath the nose. Shrapnel tore upward through the thin aluminum skin, through the navigator's compartment, through equipment, through flesh. The aircraft lurched. Reilly fought the controls. The intercom filled with voices, confusion, someone screaming. "Navigator's hit!" The bombardier's voice. Panicked. "Jesus Christ, Chen's hit bad." Reilly's hands tightened on the yoke. "Keep flying. First rule, keep the aircraft in the air. Bombs away!" The bombardier. Professional training overriding panic. The aircraft lifted as 6,000 pounds of ordnance dropped free. Reilly felt the weight change, trimmed for it automatically. "Bombardier, pilot, how bad?" No answer. Then another voice. O'Brien, the top turret gunner. "Skipper, Chen's gone. Took shrapnel through the chest. He's dead." Dead. The word hung in the darkness. Reilly processed it. Grief later. Problem now. Without Chen, they had no navigator. Without a navigator, finding home across 400 miles of enemy territory and dark ocean would be nearly impossible. Co-pilot, check the navigation equipment. Lieutenant Frank Walsh, the co-pilot, unbuckled and moved aft to the navigator's compartment. Long seconds passed. Then Walsh's voice, grim. "Skipper, it's bad. Radio compass is destroyed. G-box is destroyed. Maps are covered in blood but readable. Astro compass is damaged but maybe functional. That's it." Reilly's mind raced. Radio compass gone meant they couldn't home in on radio beacons. G navigation system gone meant they couldn't use radio triangulation to fix their position. The astro compass, used for celestial navigation, was maybe functional, maybe wasn't good enough. The formation was turning for home. Reilly turned with them, but he knew the truth. In the darkness, in the weather, without navigation equipment, following the formation was their only chance. If they lost visual contact with the other bombers, they were lost. And then, as if the universe wanted to test exactly how bad things could get, the clouds rolled in. Solid overcast. The formation disappeared into gray murk. Reilly could see nothing. Just clouds. Just instruments. "All aircraft, this is lead. Heavy weather. Maintain heading 270. We'll reassemble over the North Sea." But Reilly couldn't see lead. Couldn't see anyone. They were alone in the clouds. He maintained heading. Hoped the formation was doing the same. Hoped that when they broke out of the weather, other bombers would be visible. Minutes passed. The clouds didn't break. The formation didn't reappear. Walsh's voice, quiet. "Skipper, we're alone." Reilly knew, had known for the last 3 minutes, but hearing it confirmed made it real. 10 men, 1 aircraft, 400 miles to England, no navigation equipment, no formation to follow. Darkness, weather, and fuel burning with every minute. Most pilots would panic, would call for help on the radio, would hope someone could vector them home. Reilly did something different. He remembered what the old merchant captain had taught him in 1939. When all your modern equipment fails, look up. The stars don't lie. "Walsh, bring me Chen's navigation kit." the manual plotting tools, and the star charts. "Skipper, the astro compass is damaged. I don't need the astro compass. Just bring me the charts and the plotting tools." Walsh didn't argue. He gathered the materials from the blood-soaked navigator's table and brought them forward. Reilly looked at them. Star charts for January. Plotting tools, a simple ruler and protractor, and Chen's chronometer, still running, still keeping precise time. He could do this. He'd done it on merchant ships. Aircraft moved faster, but the principle was the same. Find your position using stars, calculate heading, adjust for wind, navigate home. It would take everything he had, every bit of knowledge, every calculation, and it assumed the clouds would eventually break and give him a view of the stars. But it was possible. "All crew pilot. We've lost the formation. Navigation equipment is destroyed. I'm going to navigate us home using celestial navigation. It's going to take time. Stay sharp, watch for fighters, and pray the weather clears." Silence on the intercom, then O'Brien's voice. "Skipper, you know how to do that?" "I used to do it on ships, same principle." "Ships don't fly at 150 knots, sir." "I'm aware, but it's what we've got." Another voice, the ball turret gunner. "We trust you, Captain." Reilly felt the weight of those words. Trust, 10 lives, including his own. He checked fuel. They had maybe 4 hours at economy cruise, if they flew perfectly, if they encountered no headwinds, if nothing else went wrong. 4 hours to cover 400 miles. Possible. Barely. He pulled back the throttles, reduced power to maximize range. The bomber slowed to 140 knots, indicated airspeed. The engines settled into a steady drone. Now they just needed the clouds to break, and they needed the stars to guide them home. Part 2 of 3, Memory. Refresh. Reilly, navigating without instruments after Navigator killed Chen. Dead, navigation equipment destroyed. Walsh. Co-pilot, assisting crew. 9 men remaining, some wounded. Situation. Lost formation, in clouds, 4 hours fuel, 400 miles to England. Plan, navigate by stars using merchant marine experience. They flew blind for 37 minutes. Reilly counted every one. The clouds pressed against the windscreen like wet wool. Gray darkness, no reference points. Just instruments. Artificial horizon keeping them level. Compass showing heading 270. West, toward home. Assuming the compass was accurate, assuming they hadn't drifted, assumptions were not facts, and facts were what navigation required. Reilly's hand stayed steady on the yoke, but his mind was calculating constantly. Airspeed 140 knots. But that was indicated airspeed, not ground speed. Wind would affect their actual speed over the ground. Chen would have known the wind. Chen would have calculated the drift and given him corrections every 10 minutes. Chen was dead. Walsh sat in the right seat, silent, watching the instruments, watching Reilly. The co-pilot had flown 20 missions but had never navigated. Few pilots did. That was the navigator's job. Specialized training, specialized equipment. Walsh was a competent pilot. He was not a navigator. Neither was Reilly. Not in an aircraft. But he'd navigated merchant ships across the North Atlantic in weather that made this look like a summer cruise. Different speed, same mathematics. Position, heading, time, distance. The math didn't care if you were on water or in the air. The radio crackled. Static. Fragments of other aircraft trying to communicate. Reilly didn't respond. Radio discipline. And what would he say? That he was lost? That his navigator was dead? That he was going to try something no B-17 pilot had attempted? No. Better to stay silent and work the problem. At 38 minutes, the clouds began to thin. Not breaking, just thinning. Gray became lighter gray. Reilly could see texture now instead of uniform murk. "Come on," he whispered. "Show me the stars." 42 minutes. Gaps appeared. Brief windows. Reilly caught glimpses of black sky and no stars yet. The overcast was still too thick. 47 minutes. The bomber broke through. The clouds fell away beneath them, and above was the universe. Stars, thousands of them. Brilliant points of light against infinite black. The winter constellations spread across the sky like a map written in fire. Reilly exhaled. First piece of luck all night. "Walsh, kill the cockpit lights. I need darkness to see the stars clearly." Walsh flipped switches. The red cockpit lighting died. Darkness flooded the cockpit, broken only by the faint glow of instrument faces. Reilly's eyes adjusted. The stars became sharper, brighter. He identified constellations instantly. There, Polaris, the North Star, fixed point in the sky, true north, every navigator's anchor. There, Orion, the hunter, unmistakable, belt and sword, rising in the east this time of year. There, Cassiopeia, the W-shaped constellation, northern skeet. Reilly had the pieces. Now he needed to work the problem. Walsh, I need you to take the controls and hold this exact heading. Don't deviate. I need to shoot the stars. Shoot the stars? Measure their angle above the horizon. It's how you find your position. Walsh took the yoke. I've got the aircraft. You have the aircraft, Reilly confirmed. He grabbed Chen's navigation kit. The sextant. If the astro compass was damaged, he'd improvise. He didn't need precision equipment, just angles. He pulled out a simple protractor, the kind a high school student would use, and he grabbed the plotting board. This would be crude, very crude. On a ship, you had a stable platform and a visible horizon. In an aircraft at 22,000 feet, you had neither. The bomber swayed and bounced in the air currents. The horizon was invisible in the darkness below. But Reilly had one advantage. He knew roughly where they were. They'd been on course when Chen was hit. The bomb run had been on target. He'd seen the formation turn for home, so they'd started from Leipzig, heading west. 37 minutes of flight at 140 knots, minus whatever headwind they were facing, meant they were somewhere over western Germany. Probably wasn't good enough. He needed better. He measured Polaris first, opened the side. Window. The temperature dropped instantly, bitter cold flooding the cockpit, and sighted along the protractor's edge toward the North Star. Measured the angle between the star and where he estimated the horizon should be. 48 degrees. That meant their latitude was approximately 48 degrees north. That matched. Western Germany, Eastern France border. That's where they should be. Good. One variable confirmed. Now he needed longitude. That was harder. Longitude required time and star positions. He checked Chen's chronometer. 22:47 hours Greenwich Mean Time. He identified Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, blazing in the south, measured its angle, consulted the star chart for January 14th, did the mathematics in his head, carried calculations, adjusted for the time. 6 degrees east longitude, maybe 7. The margin of error was significant, but it gave him a rough position. He plotted it on the chart, Western Germany, about where he'd estimated. Walsh, come right to. Heading 285. 285, aye. The bomber turned. Reilly had adjusted for wind drift. His merchant marine instincts told him the wind was from the northwest. He was compensating by heading slightly north of west. Now came the hard part. They needed to maintain this heading and recalculate position every 15 minutes. Each star site would refine their position. Each calculation would adjust their course. It was dead reckoning, but informed by celestial observations. The way sailors had navigated for centuries before radio and radar. 15 minutes later, Reilly shot the stars again. Polaris, Sirius, Betelgeuse for a third reference, plotted the angles, did the math, marked their position. They'd made good progress, 25 miles closer to home. But the wind was stronger than he'd estimated. They were drifting south. He adjusted course to 290. Skipper, Walsh said quietly. The fuel. Reilly checked the gauges. They were burning fuel faster than planned. The headwind was costing them. At this rate, they had 3 hours remaining, maybe less. 3 hours, 350 miles to go. The math was brutal. They were going to be close, very close. We'll make it, Reilly said. More hope than certainty. Behind them, the intercom crackled. O'Brien's voice. Skipper, we've got wounded men back here. Chen's not the only casualty. Rodriguez took shrapnel in the leg. Murphy's got a chest wound. They need help. Reilly's jaw tightened. Do what you can. We'll get them home. Another promise, another wait. He shot the stars again at 23:15, adjusted course. They were back on track, heading good. But the fuel gauge kept dropping. At 23:30, they crossed the Rhine. Reilly knew because he recognized the landscape below during a gap in the clouds. The river was a silver ribbon in the darkness, catching Starlight. They were over Allied territory now. France, liberated but still dangerous. The war had moved east, but German stragglers remained. An Allied anti-aircraft gunner shot first and asked questions later. A lone bomber in the night sky looked like a threat. Reilly kept altitude, stayed high, made no sudden moves. At midnight, Walsh spoke. Skipper, I need to say something. Say it. What you're doing? I've never seen anyone navigate like this. I don't know if command will believe it when we tell them. They'll believe it if we make it home. You really think we will? Reilly looked at the stars. At Polaris, steady and true. At Orion, wheeling across the winter sky. At the ancient patterns that had guided sailors home for thousands of years. Yes, he said, I do. But the fuel gauge told a different story. At 00:15 hours, Reilly shot the stars again. They were over northern France now. The English Channel was ahead, maybe 40 miles. The fuel gauge showed 1 hour remaining. 1 hour, 80 miles to the English coast, then another 40 miles to their base at Ruggem. The mathematics were unforgiving. They wouldn't make Ruggem. They'd be lucky to make the English coast. Walsh had done the same calculation. Skipper? I know. We'll put down at the first airfield we reach. Any airfield. I don't care if it's RAF, USAAF, or a farmer's field. Copy. They crossed the Channel coast at 00:45. Reilly recognized the area from the charts. Calais. They'd drifted south, but they were over Allied territory, over land. That was what mattered. The fuel gauge showed 30 minutes, maybe less. The engines were still running smooth, but Reilly could feel the aircraft getting lighter, fuel weight bleeding away. He shot the stars one more time, calculated their position, checked the chart, 60 miles to Ruggem, 30 minutes of fuel. The math didn't work. They were going to flame out before they made it home. All crew pilot, we're not going to make our base. Fuel's too low. I'm looking for any airfield. Watch for lights. Watch for anything. The crew acknowledged. No panic, just professionals doing their job. Reilly flew on. The stars wheeled overhead. Polaris stayed fixed. The bomber droned westward. At 01:02, the number 4 engine coughed, sputtered, quit. Fuel starvation. Reilly feathered the prop. 3 engines now, still flyable, but the other engines would die soon. Walsh landing checklist. We're putting her down at the next airfield we see. Or the next field. Period. Walsh started the checklist. Mechanical, calm, good man. The number 2 engine died at 01:07, 2 engines now. The aircraft was descending. Reilly couldn't maintain altitude on 2 engines with their weight and damage. Crew, brace for emergency landing. We're going down one way or another in the next 5 minutes. The intercom filled with acknowledgments. Men securing equipment, preparing. Reilly scanned the darkness ahead, looking for lights, looking for anything. There, at 11 o'clock, lights, a runway, an airfield. Walsh, I've got lights, 11 o'clock. I see them, Reilly. Didn't know what airfield it was, didn't care. It was a runway. That was enough. He turned toward it. The number 1 engine coughed, started to die. Come on, baby. 5 more minutes. Just 5. The engine caught again, kept running. Barely. They were 3 miles from the runway when the number 3 engine quit. One engine on a B-17 that should have 4. The aircraft was sinking. Reilly pushed the nose down to maintain airspeed. They were gliding now more than flying. 2 miles. The runway lights grew closer. The last engine died. Complete silence except for wind. They were a glider. A very heavy, very damaged glider. Gear down, Reilly ordered. Walsh hit the gear lever. Nothing happened. No hydraulic pressure. The gear wouldn't extend. Hand crank it. Walsh grabbed the manual gear crank and started pumping. The physical labor enormous, but the gear slowly extended. 1 mile. They were too low. Reilly could see it. They wouldn't make the runway. They'd hit short, unless. Flaps up. Stay clean. I'm going to stretch the glide. With flaps retracted, they'd glide farther. It would make the landing faster, more dangerous. But it was their only chance. The runway lights filled the windscreen. Close. So close. They cleared the airfield boundary by 50 feet. Reilly held the nose up, bleeding speed, stretching every foot of glide. The wheels touched, hard. The bomber bounced, touched again, rolled. No brakes, no hydraulic pressure, just rolling, slowing gradually. They rolled off the end of the runway into grass, soft ground. The bomber plowed through it and finally stopped. Silence, complete silence. Walsh looked at Reilly. We're alive. Reilly looked at the stars through the windscreen. Still there. Still shining. Yeah, he said. We are. The silence after the engines quit was profound. Not peaceful. Just empty. The kind of silence that comes after surviving something that should have killed you. Reilly sat in the pilot's seat, hands still on the yoke, staring through the windscreen at darkness. His body hadn't caught up with his brain yet, still in flight mode, still calculating, still waiting for the next emergency. Walsh unbuckled his harness, the click of metal on metal unnaturally loud. "I'll check the crew." Reilly nodded. Couldn't speak yet. His throat was tight. Through the windscreen, he saw lights approaching, vehicles, a jeep and a truck racing across the grass toward them. The airfield's emergency response, standard procedure for any aircraft that landed without radio contact. The vehicles stopped 30 yards away. Men piled out, American uniforms, MPs with rifles, medics with aid bags, and officers striding forward. Reilly finally unbuckled. His hands were shaking now. Adrenaline crash. He tried to stand. His legs nearly gave out. He grabbed the seat back and forced himself upright. Behind him, Walsh was moving through the aircraft, checking crew members. Reilly heard voices, O'Brien helping Rodriguez out of the ball. Turret. Someone saying Murphy was still breathing but needed a hospital. The aircraft door opened. Cold air and voices. The officer climbed aboard. A major, late 30s, suspicious eyes. "Who the hell are you and where the hell did you come from?" Reilly straightened, saluted, muscle memory. "Captain James Reilly, 94th Bomb Group. Just came from Leipzig. Navigation equipment was destroyed. We navigated home using stars." The major stared at him. "You navigated a B-17 from Germany using stars?" "Yes, sir." "That's impossible." "Apparently not, sir. We're here." The major studied Reilly's face, saw the exhaustion, the hollowness. Whatever he saw made him believe. "Jesus Christ, get your wounded out. Medics!" The medics swarmed aboard. Rodriguez was carried out first, conscious, cursing in pain. Good. Men who could curse could survive. Murphy came out on a stretcher, unconscious, chest bandaged with someone's torn flight jacket. The medics worked fast, professional. Murphy was loaded into an ambulance that appeared from somewhere. The rest of the crew climbed out. 8 men. No, 7. Reilly counted again. 7. Chen was still inside. Reilly climbed back into the aircraft, made his way to the navigator's compartment. The space was dark, cramped, smelled like copper, blood. Chen was still slumped over his table. The charts beneath him were soaked. Reilly stood there, looking at the young navigator who'd guided them through 23 missions, who'd been talking about what he'd do after the war. Go back to Berkeley, teach mathematics, get married, simple dreams. O'Brien appeared beside him. The gunner's face was streaked with tears he hadn't bothered to wipe away. "He was a good man, Skipper." "Yeah, he was." "You got us home using his charts, using what he taught us. He'd appreciate that." Reilly hadn't thought of it that way. But O'Brien was right. Every navigation lesson Chen had explained during quiet moments, every technique he'd demonstrated, every time Reilly had looked over his shoulder and asked questions, all of that had saved them tonight. "Help me move him," Reilly said quietly. They lifted Chen carefully, carried him out of the aircraft, laid him on the grass with as much dignity as they could manage. Someone produced a blanket. They covered him. The major approached. "My office. Now, I need a full debrief." Reilly followed. The base was RAF Manston, he learned, an emergency landing field on the southern coast. They'd missed Rugum by 60 miles, but they'd made England. That was what mattered. In the major's office, Reilly explained everything. The mission, the Flak hit, Chen's death, the destroyed navigation equipment, the decision to navigate by stars, every course correction, every calculation. The major listened without interrupting. When Reilly finished, the major leaned back in his chair. "You know, Command's going to want to verify this. It sounds impossible." "Check the aircraft, sir. Check the navigation equipment. It's destroyed. Check the fuel tanks. They're empty. Check my charts. I plotted every position." The major nodded slowly. "I believe you. I don't understand how you did it, but I believe you. You'll stay here tonight. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll get you and your crew transport back to Rugum." Reilly was shown to quarters, a small room, a bed. He should have collapsed, should have slept for 12 hours. Instead, he sat on the edge of the bed and stared at Chen's chronometer, still ticking in his hand. 7 hours. They'd been in the air for 8 hours and 47 minutes, felt like 8 years. Sleep didn't come. His mind kept replaying the night, The flak hit, the clouds, the stars, the fuel gauges dropping, the engines dying one by one, the glide to the runway, every moment crystal clear, every decision examined. Had he done everything right? Could he have saved Chen? No. Chen had died instantly. Could he have gotten them home faster? No. He'd flown the optimal profile. Could he have? He stopped. Himself. This was the trap. The endless second-guessing. The weight every pilot carried. The what-ifs that accumulated like shrapnel in your soul. Chen was dead. 7 men were alive who should be dead. That was the mathematics. Brutal. Simple. True. At 0700, there was a knock on the door. Walsh, Skipper, Murphy's stable. Doctors say he'll make it. Rodriguez is already giving the nurses hell. The rest of the crew wants to see you. Reilly followed Walsh to a barracks room. The crew was there. O'Brien, the bombardier, the radio operator, the waist gunners, the tail gunner. 7 faces, exhausted, alive. They stood when Reilly entered, not formal attention, just respect. O'Brien spoke first. "Skipper, we wanted to say..." He stopped, started again. "We wanted to say Chen would be proud. What you did, getting us home, using the stars, that was..." Again, words failed. The bombardier picked it up. "We've been flying together for 8 months, 24 missions now. We've seen good pilots and bad pilots. We've seen brave pilots and lucky pilots, but we've never seen anyone do what you did last night." The radio operator nodded. "Most pilots would have panicked, called for help, hoped someone would find us. You didn't hope. You acted. You figured it out." Reilly felt something break inside him. The wall he'd built, the professional detachment. "I didn't do it alone. Chen's charts, his calculations, everything he taught me, that's what got us home." "Yeah," O'Brien said quietly. "He helped, even after he was gone, but you were the one who remembered, who knew what to do, who kept us alive." They talked for another hour, about Chen, about the mission, about how close they'd come, about what they'd do when they got back to Ruggam. But there was an unspoken understanding. This crew was done. You didn't survive a night like that and climb back into a bomber the next day. Command would recognize it. They'd be stood down, reassigned, sent home probably. Transport back to Ruggam came at 1400. A C-47 that had been making supply runs. The crew loaded aboard. Chen's body came with them in a flag-draped coffin. Ruggam appeared beneath them at 1545. The airfield looked exactly as they'd left it 20 hours earlier, but everything had changed. The C-47 landed. When the door opened, the entire squadron was there. Pilots, crews, ground personnel. Word had spread. A B-17 had navigated home using stars after losing its navigator and all navigation equipment. Impossible, but true. The squadron commander, Colonel Matthews, was waiting. He saluted as Reilly descended the stairs. "Captain Reilly, welcome home." "Thank you, sir." "I need a full report, but first..." Matthews gestured to the formation behind him. "Your squadron wanted to honor Lieutenant Chen." The crews stood at attention as Chen's coffin was carried from the C-47. An honor guard, respect for a navigator who'd guided his last bomber home even in death. Reilly saluted, held it until Chen was carried past, then lowered his hand and watched as his navigator was taken to the base morgue. The debriefing lasted 3 hours. Intelligence officers, navigation specialists, even a celestial navigation expert from Coastal Command who'd been brought in specifically to verify Reilly's claims. Reilly walked them through everything, showed his charts, explained his calculations, demonstrated how he'd measured star angles using a simple protractor. The Coastal Command experts studied the work. "This is crude, but fundamentally sound. You used Sumner lines, position lines derived from star sites, multiple observations to fix position, classical navigation. I learned it on merchant ships, sir. Clearly. But applying it in an aircraft, in combat conditions with no proper equipment, that's extraordinary. Do you realize what you've proven?" "Sir?" "That celestial navigation is viable as a backup system for aircraft. We've been teaching it as theory, but no one's actually done it under real-world conditions. You've just provided the proof of concept." Within a week, Reilly's navigation technique was being studied at command level. Within a month, it was being added to Navigator training curriculum as a backup method. Within 6 months, 3 other crews had used celestial navigation to find their way home when equipment failed. But Reilly didn't care about the recognition. He cared about his crew. Rodriguez recovered, lost some mobility in his leg but kept his sense of humor. Murphy spent 2 months in the hospital but lived. The rest of the crew was stood down, sent home with full honors. 24 missions completed, tour done. Reilly was offered a stateside training position, teaching celestial navigation to new pilots. He took it. The war was ending anyway. Germany would surrender in 4 months. The need for bomber pilots was decreasing. He taught for a year, then mustered out in 1946 with a Distinguished Flying Cross and a memory of one night when the stars brought him home. He returned to Boston, went back to the Merchant Marine, eventually became a captain himself, ran the same Boston-Liverpool route he'd worked before the war. He never spoke much about that night. When other captains asked about his DFC, he told them it was for a night navigation mission, didn't elaborate. The ones who needed to know already knew. The ones who didn't wouldn't understand anyway. He married in 1948, had 3 children, taught them all to navigate by stars, not because they'd need it, GPS was coming, radar was improving, but because some knowledge was worth preserving, some skills mattered beyond their practical utility. In 1973, he received a letter from Rodriguez. The gunner had tracked him down. The letter said, "Captain, I think about that night sometimes. How close we came. How you kept calculating when most men would have given up. How you trusted the stars. I wanted you to know it mattered, not just because you saved us, but because you showed us something, that the old ways still work, that sometimes the simplest solution is the best one, that when everything modern fails, the ancient knowledge endures. Thank you for bringing us home." Reilly kept that letter in his desk drawer, reread it occasionally, especially on clear nights when he could see the stars from his back porch. In 1995, 50 years after that night, a military historian found him, wanted to interview him for a book about navigation in WWII. Reilly was 77 by then, retired, still sharp. The historian asked him to describe the night. Reilly did, in the same methodical detail he'd used in the original debriefing. The historian asked, "Were you scared?" Reilly considered the question. "No, I was too busy calculating. Fear requires mental space I didn't have. I was focused on the problem, find position, calculate heading, adjust for wind, repeat. Fear would have been a distraction. But you knew you might not make it. Yes, but knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are different things. I knew the odds. I worked to change them. That's all you can do." What would you want people to understand about that night? Reilly thought for a long time before answering. That sometimes the old knowledge matters. We focus so much on new technology, better equipment, more advanced systems. But when those systems fail, you need something fundamental, something that doesn't require electricity or radios or computers. The stars have been guiding people home for thousands of years. They guided me home that night, and they'll still be there long after all our technology is obsolete. James Reilly died in 2001 at the age of 83. Small funeral, family, a few old Merchant Marine colleagues, and 2 elderly men who'd flown with him that night in January 1945. Rodriguez had come from New Mexico, O'Brien from Chicago. They stood by the grave and remembered. "He saved our lives," Rodriguez said. "Yeah," O'Brien replied. "But more than that, he showed us something, that you don't give up, that there's always a solution if you're willing to look for it, that sometimes the answer is above you." Written in Starlight. They didn't elaborate, didn't need to. Some stories don't need embellishment. The facts are extraordinary enough. A B-17 bomber, navigation equipment destroyed, navigator dead, 400 miles from home, 8 hours of darkness, one pilot who remembered what an old merchant captain had taught him. The stars don't lie. Trust them. Calculate carefully, adjust constantly, and they'll bring you home. That was Reilly's legacy, not the medal, not the recognition, but the knowledge that when everything fails, when all your modern tools are useless, when hope seems lost, look up. The stars are still there, still shining, still showing the way home to anyone willing to learn their language. Chen would have appreciated that, the mathematics of navigation reduced to its purest form. angles and time, light and geometry. No equipment needed except a tiny mind that could calculate and the patience to observe. 7 men came home because one pilot remembered that ancient truth. And in the decades that followed, as GPS and inertial navigation and sophisticated computers made celestial navigation obsolete for practical purposes, the story persisted, taught at academies, referenced in manuals, used as a reminder. Technology fails. Equipment breaks. Radio goes silent. But the stars endure, and if you know how to read them, they'll guide you home through any darkness. That's what James Reilly proved on a January night in 1945. That's what 7 men carried with them for the rest of their lives. And that's what matters. Not the heroism, though it was heroic. Not the skill, though it was extraordinary. But the simple truth that some knowledge is timeless. Some methods are eternal. Some lights never go out. You just have to remember to look up.